up until now, you guys, we've went through, I give you a graph, and I ask you for the amplitude, I ask you for the period, and I ask you for the median or midline, or I ask you to find A, B, or D, right? And you came up with an equation. And often they're mixed together in textbooks, but what I find is that no one ever understands the graph or the equation well if I teach them not separately, so that's why I always teach them separately. So now we're going to go over just being given the equation. If you look at the equation, the amplitude is super easy. If you're given an amplitude question on your diploma and you're given the equation, you should just be very, very grateful. The amplitude is just the absolute value of A. So if A is 3, the amplitude is 3. If A is -3, the amplitude is 3, right? Because your amplitude is always positive. So off an equation, your amplitude is the absolute value of A. Okay? The period on a graph, you guys, that was the hardest thing you guys found, right? Was the period of the graph. Well, if you're asked for the period of off an equation, you just go 2 pi divided by whatever the b value is. And the b value is just found between the word sine and the x. So if you look between the word sine and the x, you take that number and you put it below 2 pi and you have your period. It's that easy. The median line is whatever the heck d is. So if d is -2, the median line is at y equals -2. Okay? So the equation to questions is not hard. But if they ask you for the maximum value, let's think about this. So if you're given a graph like this, say you were given this graph, correct? You're given that graph. And you find the median line of that graph. And say it was here, right? And these are what? These values from the median line down and the median line up. What are those? No, what's this value here? This little arrow value. Your amplitude. Yeah. So then, if I knew the median line value, say it was 1, and I knew my amplitude was 3, let's say, and I knew this was at y equals 1, let's say, okay? How could I get the minimum and the maximum? If I know my median and I know my amplitude, how can I get my minimum max? Right. So if I take the midline and I add the amplitude, I get the maximum. If I take the midline and I subtract from it the amplitude, I get the minimum. So how can I write that? Well, I can say if I take the midline and add the amplitude, or if I take the midline and subtract the amplitude. That was what we said, correct? So how could we write that as letters? How can we write that as letters from this equation? What letter on this equation represents the midline? What letter on the equation? D. So we could say D, which is the midline, plus, what's the amplitude? What is the amplitude off that equation? A, but there's something special about the A. It has to be positive, so how can we write that? Absolute value of A. So if we take D plus the absolute value of A, we get the maximum. If we take D minus the absolute value of A, we get the minimum. So we can get the maximum and minimum extremely easily off an equation. Okay? So, one more thing to think about. If A doesn't exist, okay, if A doesn't exist, if I have y equals sine, what would A have to be? Could it be a 1 or a 0? This is the confusion. 1 or a 0? It has to be a 1. If it was a 0, 0 times sine, what would happen? It would be 0. The whole sine function would go away. So that's not good. So if there is no A value, A is 1. If there is no B value, B is 1. If there is no C value, what is C? What was it before when we didn't have a C? It didn't exist. What was it? 0. Remember? We had y equals, let's say 1 sine x. Like, let's say it's like this. Or I'm just going to write it as sine x. If you just had y equals sine x like this, Let's think about it. A has to be a 1, because if it was a 0, the whole thing would cancel. B has to be a 1, because if it was a 0, this whole thing would be a 0. This would be 0. It would cancel. Okay? If there's no C value, though, what would it have to be? What would I add to this? A plus 0, but it would be in brackets with it, right? And if there's no D value, what would it be at the back? Plus 0, because if it was plus 1, then there would be a D value, it would be 1, right? So always think about it. If there isn't an A value, it's 1. If there isn't a B value, it's 1. If there isn't a C value, it's 0. If there isn't a D value, it's 0. Okay? So we're going to, for all of these examples below, for each of the following, we're going to determine the amplitude, the period, the median value or midline, the max and min, and we're going to sketch the graph and determine the range. Okay? The sketching the graph, we will deal with by just putting in our calculator and sketch it. Okay? So what I like doing first is putting in all the values if they're missing. So this is going to be y equals 5 sine, what's my B value? 1. And what's my C and my D? They're both 0. Do I have to put that? No. Okay. So 1, my amplitude. My amplitude is just the absolute value of A. What's my A? 5. So it's the absolute value of 5, which is 5. So this graph has a distance of what to what from the min to the max? Trick question. 10. Because remember, amplitude is just half the distance, right? So from min to max would be 10. 2, the period. If we ever need the period from an equation, we go to our formula sheet and use it. If we need the period from a graph, we have to physically find it. Okay? So period equals 2 pi over b. So it's 2 pi over, what's my b value? We wrote it out as a 1, right? So my period is 2 pi. So this graph actually repeats itself every 2 pi. Remember 2 pi is the same as 360 degrees? So it repeats itself every 2 pi. What's the median value? The median is my D. What's my D? 0. So the midline would be y equals 0. The median value would be 0. The midline would be y equals 0 because it's a line. For the maximum and minimum value. How do I get the maximum? D plus maximum equals D plus the absolute value of A. And the minimum is D minus the absolute value of A. It might not be 10 unless it started right at 0. The distance between the max and the min is a distance of 10, but that doesn't mean it's like actually at 10. So what's my D? My midline is 0. If I go up 5, which is my amplitude, it's going to be at, what is going on with the computer? Like, what, that's a, I love technology. Is there like a joke? Like, is it like a ghost? It looks like kind of like a Pac-Man person or something. Zero plus 5 is 5. What is going on? Oh, 0 plus 5 equals 5. And then this one's going to be 0 minus 5, which is negative 5. You guys, it makes sense. Why does it make sense? Because your middle line is at the x-axis at y equals 0, right? If I go up 5, I'm maxing out at positive 5. If I go down 5, I'm maxing out, I'm minning out at negative 5, right? So it makes sense. I just want you to be able to punch into your calculator. This is what we're going to practice. Okay, so we're going to go to our calculator. We're going to type in y equals 5 sine x in our calculators. We're going to make sure we're in radian mode. So y equals 5 sine x. Now, everyone has their calculator out. We type into our calculator y equals 5 sine x. Horizontally, we know that this thing repeats itself every 2 pi, correct? So what I'm going to do so that I can see 2 repetitions is I'm going to make my x min be negative 2 pi, and I'm going to make my x max be positive 2 pi, so that I kind of see some of the graph on the left of the y-axis and some of the graph on the right. So for my x min, I'm going to put negative 2 pi. Please never use 3.14 for pi. Use the pi button. Okay? So you're going to have negative 2 pi as your x min, 2 pi as your x max. Leave your scale at whatever it is. Do not stress yourself out based on the scale. Okay? What should my y minimum be? What is my minimum? What is my minimum? We figured it out. Negative 5. So I want to make it a little lower. So I'm going to make it negative 6 so that I can actually see the bottom of it. And my y max is 5, so I'm going to make my y max be 6 so I can see the top of it. Then press graph. There she be. Do you see it repeating twice? Yeah. Yeah, you do. Okay. So what's my domain? My domain for every single one of these sinusoidals, unless it's a word problem, is XER, because it's a function that just repeats forever. It just does this forever this way and this forever this way, right? Forever and ever and ever and ever. The range, however, maxes out at a certain spot and mins out at a certain spot, so it can be all the values in between those. So my range for this particular one is going to be negative 5 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 5 YER. Your range, if you want to write this up here, your range is always y such that the minimum is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to the maximum YER. So that's why it's extremely important to be able to find the min and max. The minimum is d minus the absolute value of a, and the maximum is d plus the absolute value of a. So for b, you have y equals sine x. Okay? I'm going to fill in the a value, because the a value is what? Because it's not here. What is it? 1. Sine. My b value is 6x. Because the b value is always the value that's between sine and x. What's my c and my d in this case? 0. They don't exist. Okay? So what I want you to do is find the amplitude, the period, the median, value, midline, the max and min, get it to show up on your graphing calculator, and the range. Okay, so we're going to go through this one quickly. The amplitude is 1. So the total distance from the min to the max is 2, right? The amplitude is 1, so from the median line up, it's 1. From the median line down, it's 1. The period is 2 pi divided by 6, which you could leave as that. Or remember, you can reduce the fraction. I could take a 2 out of both of them. So it would be pi over 3. If you're putting it into your calculator and your math entering, you have to do 2 divided by 6 math enter, and then just add the pi back in. If you try and put this whole thing in and math enter it ain't happening. You cannot turn a decimal that doesn't stop or doesn't repeat into a fraction. And pi is a decimal that doesn't terminate, stop, or repeat. So pi can never be turned into a fraction. It is what it is. Okay. Then 3. The median line, there isn't one. So D equals 0 again. It's not always 0. We're just starting off that way, right? The next page, it'll change. 4, the minimum and the maximum. So the maximum is D plus the amplitude. So D plus the absolute value of A. And the minimum is equal to D minus the absolute value of A. Because if I take that midline and I subtract the amplitude, I'll get to the bottom. If I take that midline and I add the amplitude, I'll get to the top, right? So the D is 0, the amplitude is 1, so this graph maxes out at 1. This one, the D is 0, the amplitude is 1, so this one minimums out at -1. So what would I change on my window when I go to put this in? I would make my x-min be negative pi over 3 and my x-max be pi over 3. Then I can see 2 periods, right? This one maxes out at 1 and mins out at -1. So I'd make my y-max be 2 and my y-min be -2, right? So based on your information, here is how you set up your window, you guys. Plug it in and look at it. And then your range is always y such that my minimum, which is -1, is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1. You always state the low one first, then go to the high one. It's never the wrong other way. Don't ever do that. YER. Okay? You just made it repeat a lot. So I want you guys to do this page and the back side. Yeah. So let's look at 2 pi over 0.3, okay? 2 pi over 0.3. If we want to reduce this, you guys, how do we reduce it? 2 divided by 0.3, then what? Math, enter, enter. What do we get? I suck. Oh, I have that videoed. Good. Just in case the whole world wonders, if you're like, no, now it's for life.
This is how you say staffin.
Staffin? Eskistin. Yeah. Okay, 3. D equals 0. 4. The max is at 0 plus, now there's my 0.3. Oops. And then the min is 0 minus 0.3, which is negative 0.3. So your range is y such that negative 0.3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 0.3. Okay? Then flip over. So this here is due for Monday. Look at this one. We're going to look at example 2. We're going to go through the rest of example 1 on Monday to remind you what the heck you did on Friday. We're going to go through the homework from yesterday on Monday to remind you what you did on Thursday. Monday. We're going through all the homework on Monday. Yeah. So here we have consider the sinusoidal function y equals a sine bt plus 0 plus d, where the equation of the sinusoidal function has no phase shift. And now where they're giving us info, and we have to make the equation. So y equals, if they give you this, they're going to have to tell you if a is less than 0 or a is greater than 0. Okay? So I'm going to say a is less than 0. So what does that mean? I'm going to have to write my a as negative, oh, just negative 7, because your amplitude is your a value. And it's negative 7 because I told you a is less than 0. Then, no, we're just going from words to the equation. And then sine. Now they gave us the period, but we need b. So this is even easier than yesterday because they gave you the period. You need b. They give you the period and you need b for the equation. You go b equals 2 pi divided by the period. They told you the period's 2 pi. So what's your b value? 1. And then it's going to be 1t plus 0. And then it says our midline equation is -4, so we put a -4 at the back because that's our D. It's a T. Because the top equation had a T. So if I have A is less than 0 here again, my Y is going to be -2.5. The period is 1 radian. So we're going to go 2 pi divided by 1. So it's 2 pi. So that's my B value. So I'm going to get 2 pi plus 0. Oh, I left out the sign. That's nice. 2.5 sine 2 pi plus 0. Do we have to have this plus 0, or could we just have a 2 pi? Yeah. And then the midline is 6, so we add a 6. And then for your homework, these two. How do I get the range from equations? Range is always y such that the min is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to max yer. So I need the min and the max. How do I get the min and the max? Minimum is what for my equation? Don't even have to graph it. The minimum is what? D minus the absolute value of A. The maximum is D plus the absolute value of A. Get your values, fill it in. Do it for both of these. We'll go through this on Monday as well.